Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are live the third Wednesday of each month to discuss compliance topics that are important to you. Today's discussion will be on diminished capacity and elder abuse. And as usual, we will have a Q&A session and an overview of a myriacompliance.com feature. Before we get started, we will touch on some disclosures. RIA in a Box and myriacompliance.com are not law firms, CPA firms, or registered investment advisory firms. None of the information presented, advice given, or services rendered should be considered legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. And if you require the services of an attorney, we recommend that you seek out an independent attorney and verify their securities law experience. As usual, if you have questions, you can get those questions answered by clicking the questions window on the GoToWebinar dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. We will make every effort to get those questions answered, and our panelists will be fielding those today. And speaking of panelists, webinar participants are Hovig Melkonian, Colleen Keefe, Demetrius Boone, Dorothy Podzemny, and Chad Hartwick. And I will be your host, your presenter today, Jason Vincent Haler. And as I mentioned before, today's topic is going to be on diminished capacity and elder abuse. We'll touch on some definitions, help you identify some red flags, and go over a few policy considerations as you work with an aging population. First, we'll start out with some definitions of what diminished capacity is. There's not a specific disease known as diminished capacity. It describes a group of symptoms, and those symptoms affect things like memory, thinking, social abilities, cognitive function, enough to interfere with an individual's daily function. And so a couple examples here. There's mild cognitive impairment. It's slight but noticeable and measurable of a decline in cognitive abilities, including memory, thinking skills, things like processing information, reasoning, understanding new information, things of that nature. And then there's the dementia component. Dementia is a chronic or persistent disorder of the mental process caused by brain disease, brain injury, and it can be marked by memory disorders, personality changes, and impaired reasoning. It's only diagnosed when both memory and another cognitive function are affected severely enough to interfere with a person's ability to carry out those routine daily activities. And that's how dementia is described, and the diagnosis of dementia is described in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And so what kind of cognitive changes are we looking for here? We'll talk about a few red flags, and then we'll discuss things that you may identify. And again, just because one of these is present doesn't necessarily mean that the individual has dementia or any kind of mild cognitive impairment. These things can come out due to several different factors. This could be caused by, again, an injury. These could be caused by a disease. These could be caused by stress. Even from time to time, you'll see these things kind of crop up. So some red flags to be mindful of are memory loss. If the client has difficulty communicating or finding words to describe what they're thinking, what they're feeling, difficulty with reasoning or problem solving, difficulty handling complex tasks, planning and organizational issues, coordination, and motor function there. If they're having trouble with their movement, that may be a red flag of something else going on. Or if there's confusion or disorientation, things to keep an eye on there. If a client comes to your office and mentions that they got lost on the way there, or if they're struggling to find their way, that could be a sign of an issue that you should be mindful of. We may see psychological changes in a person that's suffering from cognitive function issues, diminished capacity, mild cognitive impairment, that sort of thing. You may see personality changes. Someone who's very prim and proper um, in their normal course of behavior might become very crude, just seemingly all of a sudden. This is something to keep in mind when you're working with your clients, when you're interacting with your clients. They may be suffering from depression or anxiety. Again, some of those personality changes may lead to some inappropriate behavior. They may have a paranoia, agitation, and we may see hallucinations crop up here. And so these are things to be mindful of when you're working with your clients. Pay attention to how they interact with you. And this is somewhere that your staff can be engaged in this as well, because your staff is also going to have interactions with them. Maybe while they're waiting for their appointment, they'll notice some of these changes and some of these red flags. And the big concern here is the potential for elder abuse. So elder abuse is the mistreatment or exploitation of senior citizens. Elder financial abuse or exploitation is the illegal or improper use of an elderly person's assets. Some examples of elder abuse or elder financial abuse would be cashing checks without authorization. We've heard of caretakers who have forged a signature, written a check without proper authorization from the individual. Stealing or misusing money or possessions, coercing or deceiving an elderly person into signing a document, or improperly using a guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney, things of that nature. Some red flags for elder abuse, things to watch out for there are new quote-unquote best friends, someone who is all of a sudden very close to that individual that you're working with, that client. Family or friends that were previously distant might now be more involved. Not always a sign of elder abuse, but just something to be mindful of, something to raise a little bit of a red flag and pay some additional attention to. If you see suspicious signatures on accounts or requests, there may be new names added to accounts or property titles. Recently signed legal documents that an elderly person are usually an indicator that there may be something going on there. Multiple revisions or recent revisions to an estate plan. There could be something that's going on that's completely legitimate there, but again, just something to identify. If mail is redirected, possessions go missing, things like that might indicate that there's something going on here. If there are all of a sudden unpaid bills or notices of default, clients, as their investment advisor, clients may feel comfortable asking you about these or discussing these things with you. Any new or unnecessary services, inadequate services compared to the size of the estate. There may be a confusion or lack of understanding about the financial arrangements that the client has. If they constantly need to consult another person before making a decision, particularly if that's not someone who's been in the picture for most of that client relationship, that could indicate that there's something going on there. Oftentimes when an elderly person is going through these sorts of things, you're going to see increased levels of stress and anxiety. They're going to be embarrassed. Oftentimes when someone feels to one of these situations, they're going to be embarrassed or they're going to feel guilty because they believe that they should have seen this coming. They should have been on guard for that. And then there may be some isolation going on there. It could be pressure from the perpetrator, or it could be a function of that embarrassment or feeling of guilt that they just don't want to address that with their loved ones. They don't want to admit to it. Moving on to policy considerations, this is actually a topic that is very timely with the SEC. The Assistant Director of the Office of Compliance Inspections and Examinations has said earlier this month that, quote, our focus is on examining advisors with considerable senior investor bases, end quote. So definitely something that the regulators are paying attention to. Normally, if the SEC makes a particular examination topic of focus, you'll see the states kind of pick up on this too. So if you're a state registered firm, this doesn't apply just to SEC folks. When you're thinking about these diminished capacity and elder abuse policies, it's a good idea to have a robust policy in place that's tailored to the firm. You need to define what that diminished capacity and elder abuse is. We talked about that and touched on that earlier, so make sure that your procedures can identify that. That way your personnel, when they read through and attest to that policy and procedures manual, they have an idea of what that is. Your policy should provide some guidance on preemptive actions. So determine whether or not a client's created a living will or a durable power of attorney for financial matters. It gives you some guidance that way if there is a situation where the client is unable, they don't have the capacity to continue handling their finances, you'll know who that is that's going to have the authority that's been granted ahead of time by the client. Also, not a bad idea to obtain contact information for a trusted contact. Your policy should identify what information can and will be shared and under what circumstances. And the trusted contact form that you use should also identify that and have your clients sign that, particularly as they get older. A senior client is typically viewed as anyone 62 years of age and older. And so we see that as becoming a larger and larger percentage of firms' client base. RIA firms need to train their advisors and staff on senior protection, and that training needs to be documented too. So make sure that you have a policy in place that addresses some of that training. And training can just be reviewing these red flags on an annual basis with your folks. You should consider identifying some of those red flags in your procedures. And the list of red flags in this presentation that we touched on earlier is definitely not an exhaustive list. There's not an exhaustive list that you can really put into your policies and procedures either. So, identify red flags. There's not a specific number or combination that confirm any kind of diminished capacity, but just document any red flags that you're seeing and understand that those observations, any kind of observation, can be beneficial here. And if you start seeing red flags piling up, probably a good idea to reach out to that trusted contact on your trusted contact form, or possibly just have a conversation about next steps and what to do. Keep in mind in your documentation, in your client notes, if you're not a psychologist, if you're not officially qualified in some capacity to make diagnosis of a cognitive disorder, don't diagnose it. Just observe and document. Make sure that you have good notes on observations from both your staff and yourself in discussions with the client, visible observations, things that the client may say or do while they're in your office, or interacting with them at outside events. If they're active in the community and you happen to see them out and about, you can document some of those observations as well if it appears that there's something significant going on here. And if you would like some additional resources on red flags and identifying those, the Mayo Clinic is a good resource for that. There are also others that discuss the symptoms to be on the lookout for and also some possible causes. But again, we're not going to be diagnosing it, so causes are less important. We just need to identify what those red flags are and when it may be time to reach out to that trusted contact that your client has identified. And keep in mind too that some of these things are treatable and reversible and some aren't. So you may see cognitive function improve with some clients while others continue to decline. Your policy and procedures need to identify when and if diminished capacity or elder abuse is suspected. What do you do? What's the expectation there? Make sure that you know your state's rules. Some states have mandatory reporting requirements. So know what those are and be mindful of that if you start to identify some of these things. Your policies should determine when you notify a trusted contact. And then once you've identified these issues, do not meet with the client alone. Have someone else in there. If it's an assistant, if it's the trusted contact person with that client, make sure that you have another set of eyes and ears in the room with you when you're meeting with the client. And then be sure you thoroughly document all your meetings and calls with that client, particularly after you've identified these red flags and some potential diminished capacity. We do have some policy language available related to diminished capacity and elder abuse. Again, this policy is something that you can use, and make sure that you tailor that to your specific firm, your specific needs, and the work you do. And just be mindful of your aging clients, and understand that while in most cases there's not a specific rule dealing with elder abuse and diminished capacity, this is something that we're seeing more and more regulators take on as a potential issue, and try to get ahead of this a little bit and prevent some potential elder abuse, because as mental capacity diminishes, elder abuse becomes easier. It's something that bad actors will look for to try to take advantage of, and so we want to make sure that we're proactive on the RIA side of things to make sure that you're recognizing these issues in your clients and potentially getting them some help, and making sure that you're protected from any wrongdoing there as well. We'll move into an overview of a new MyRIA compliance feature, a new MRC feature. It's our vendor due diligence module. Currently, we have the initial beta version released, and it includes a limited selection of some common vendors, but we plan to add more. This vendor due diligence module allows you to streamline your due diligence on your vendors. We're trying to basically help you streamline that process with the collection of the necessary documentation for your due diligence. The way that works is you can subscribe to the vendors that are available on there that you use, and you can view their due diligence documents, which is noted in your compliance log, that you've reviewed those. And then additionally, anytime there's an update to the vendor's documents that they have uploaded, you'll receive a notification so that you can go in and view those again and make sure that you stay up to date on that. If you are using a vendor that you don't see on the vendor list in the beta version, you can request that your vendors be added through the portal. There's a highlighted section. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but it's kind of down in the lower right corner. There's a highlighted section that says send request to vendor to join RIA Box's vendor due diligence platform. That will start the process, and it will start the integration there so that we can hopefully get all of your vendors on the tool and usable for you there. We always touch on the blog. This month's blog is discussing vendor due diligence, our vendor due diligence tool, as well as cybersecurity. This is another area where regulators are starting to implement rules on cybersecurity and what to do in cyber attacks, and it's also a focus area for the SEC. So we have a couple of types of cyber attacks, a couple of blog posts talking about how you can prevent those types of cyber attacks. And before we close here, this was a fairly short broadcast today. Make sure that you enter any final questions in the chat window on your dashboard. We appreciate your attendance. As always, this webinar will be archived on MyRIA Compliance and will be available to you soon for viewing. We welcome any comments or suggestions for future topics. If you have any of those, please send those to Chad Hartwick. It's chartwick@riainabox.com. And it would appear that the date for the next webinar is incorrect. It will be on the third Wednesday of April, not August, but it will be held at 4:15 Eastern Time. And you can register for that now at myriacompliance.com in the Compliance Webinars section. You'll find that in the drop-down menu under Compliance 101. Again, please make sure any final questions that you have are entered. We appreciate again that you took the time out to attend the webinar, and we appreciate that.